Hey guys, welcome back to our second lesson in chapter 15, 15.2, the second New Deal takes hold. In this section we're going to learn about the second New Deal, but let's recap real quick. First of all, why do we need a New Deal? Well, that's because of the Depression. Why is there a Depression? Well, it's because the bank's failing and the stock market failing. The current president during the Great Depression was President Hoover. He wasn't really doing a whole lot. He was criticized for not doing much, and he was a firm believer in no government handouts. Then comes along Franklin Roosevelt. Roosevelt was the former governor of the state of New York, and in that state he instituted several work relief programs and some what we would call today federal welfare programs, and they worked. But what most people didn't know is that they were only working for a short time. Anyhow, because he was successful in the state of New York, people elected him. He takes over office in 1933. I think he was elected in 32, takes over in 1933. His first set of New Deal programs, review of 15.1, worked for a short time. But again, as you can see, the title of 15.2, the second New Deal takes hold. Clearly something's not right. If the New Deal, when it was first instituted, was working, there would be no need for a second New Deal. Well, what was wrong? Why was the first New Deal, as it's now referred to, why was it not working? Well, first, most of Roosevelt's programs like the CWA and the PWA, they were only for a short period of time. You can build roads, but after a while, the roads are built. Then what do you do? And then the Supreme Court also gets involved, and the Supreme Court ruled on several New Deal programs as unconstitutional. And so Roosevelt's cabinet and his brain trust, if you will, as he called them, had to rethink some things, and that's what we have when we called this the second New Deal. Okay, so that's a quick recap of 15.1 and why we are now into 15.2. The second 15.2, the second New Deal takes hold. Your notes in your flip notes look like a little spreadsheet, and this is what you should have, and you can see how it's all filled out. You have 6 categories, and across the top of my slide here, you can see farmers, migrant workers, and others living in rural areas. That's number 1. And then you have 2 columns. First column is what problems did these people face during the Great Depression, and then how did Roosevelt's New Deal programs, the second New Deal, impact that, or how did they try to help? Again, we're focusing on the second New Deal. Feel free to pause this video as you need to, because there is a lot of information. I realize you have a small section to write in, so write small. I apologize for some of you who write big. If you need to, attach a sheet of paper next to it and staple to it, or slip it inside it, whatever you need. But pause the video as you need and then advance it as you go along. First of all, farmers, migrant workers, and others living in rural areas, what problems did they face during the Great Depression? Well, as you learned during the Great Depression, dust storms. Dust storms were huge. The dust storms were caused by soil depletion, growing the same crop over and over and over again, depleting the nutrients. And you've seen several pictures of dust storms, but here, just as a review, here's the region of the dust storm. We are approximately right about here, little city of Nixa, and all of the eastern United States received that dust, as you saw in the videos from the Great Depression, all the way out into the Atlantic Ocean. Ships recording a 1/4 inch of dust on their ships. So it's a pretty bad situation. So that's one of the problems that farmers faced during the Great Depression. Soil depletion, as I just said. They're running out of money. The crops that they did grow are selling for such a low price that they can't even make ends meet, and they can't buy more land to grow more crops. Their housing is not very good, and they're going into debt again because they can't sell what they grow. And eventually, if you're in debt and you're not making any money, you enter in what's called foreclosure, and that's where the banks come in and take everything you have. And then, of course, electricity. That just goes without saying. Most rural areas were not in what we call the modern age. How did the government assist? First, the Resettlement Administration. We'll get into that a little bit later. Farm Securities Administration, again, helping people out with their farm payments. That leads to the Farm Mortgage Moratorium. And the Rural Electrification Administration. This is probably the biggest help to farmers. Again, there's a lot of information there, guys. Feel free to pause the video if you need to and copy it down. There is a short video I'd like you to watch. It's from a modern movie, Hollywood movie, about electrification. And we'll get to that in just a second. Here's another photo, a color photo of the Dust Bowl. That's just insane to imagine a dust storm like that. Here's a photo of the REA, the Rural Electrification Association, stringing up the electrical wires through the rural areas. This is the video I was talking about, so sit back and enjoy.
Don't be ignorant. I told you they was flooding this valley. No, that ain't it. We praised the God and He pitied us. Well, it never fails. Once again, you two hayseeds are showing how much you want bread left. There's a perfectly scientific explanation for what just happened. That ain't until you was standing back down at the gallows. Well, any human being will cast about in a moment of stress. No, the fact is they're flooding this valley so they can hydroelectric up the whole darn state. Yes, sir. The South is going to change. Everything's going to be put on electricity and run on a paying basis. Out with the old spiritual mumbo-jumbo, the superstitions, and the backward ways. We're going to see a brave new world where they run everybody a wire and hook us all up to a grid. Yes, sir. A veritable age of reason, like the one they had in France. Not a moment too soon. Not a moment too soon. Hey, there's Tommy.
Okay, that's probably enough of the video to get the idea that if you haven't seen it before, this is a scene from the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And I captured that just to emphasize the point that valleys were flooded like Table Rock Lake, and dams were built, and then that was used to generate hydroelectricity, and that's all part of the Rural Electrification Administration. All right, number 2. Students know the young people. What problems do students face? Well, unemployment. They had to drop out of school to try to find work. There wasn't a lot of work there for them. Poverty. If you don't have a job, you're going to be without money, living in poverty, not knowing where your next meal is going to come from. Poverty then leads to hopelessness, no hope for the future, and a loss of dignity. What kind of person cannot provide for their families? You dropped out of school, your parents need your help, and there's no help. How does that make you feel about yourself? Well, that loss of dignity was a huge impact. People were wanting something, anything to help them out. And again, it goes without saying, without a job, you don't have spending money. You got to have that money. How did the federal government, how did the New Deal program help? The biggest help to these young people was the NYA, the National Youth Administration. This was a job training program, very much like OTC is today. You would go to school for a specific job training situation, whether it be mechanics or welding or whatever, and by the time you finished that program, you had the skills to be able to find a job. Again, when students dropped out of school, they were looking for work. If there was no work in their town, one of the best ways to get around the country was by rail, and they just hopped on a train. Obviously, they didn't have the money to pay for a ticket on the train, so they just hopped on and freeloaded around the country. A book, very good book, called Riding the Rails. It's a story of how the teenagers survived the Great Depression on the railroads. And every time a train would stop at a town, the young men would hop off, look for jobs. Most towns, as you can see here, would post signs, just basically telling the men on the train, you might as well just stay on and wait for the train to take off because there's no jobs here. All right, number 3, teachers, writers, artists, and other professionals. What problems did they face during the Great Depression? Unemployment. Remember, unemployment during the Great Depression was 25%. Again, unemployment leads to poverty. Poverty leads to hopelessness. Hopelessness, loss of dignity. You can't take care of your family. And just like the last one, loss of dignity, lack of spending money. Got to spend. Federal government, Second New Deal helps out by passing what's called the Works Progress Administration. Now, in the last section, we talked about the PWA, the Public Works Administration. These are very, very easily confused because of the letters, this alphabet soup of the New Deal. The PWA, from the last section, remember, it was responsible for building of schools and community buildings and dams. The WPA of the Second New Deal is more like the CWA, because the WPA helped with teacher salaries. But not only did it help with teacher salaries, writers were given a job. And the reason we have some slave narratives today, there's a picture of school children and there's a picture of a school building. Kind of makes you, hopefully, makes you appreciate what you have at Nixa school. But again, back to the writers. Writers were sent down south, and literally job creation, just making something up. They were sent down south to capture the stories of former slaves. And because of the New Deal program, the WPA, we have today what's called the slave narratives, and they are accessible on the government's archive site. Artists were given a job. A lot of starving artists, literally starving artists, no job, nothing anywhere. So the WPA set aside a bunch of money to give artists a job, and a lot of city buildings in major metropolitan areas had murals painted on them. And you can see this artist here is painting what appears to be an Egyptian motif. And then other professionals, Broadway plays and actors, they were given a job, they were given money to put on plays just for people's enjoyment. And if you look, it's difficult to see, but if you look really closely, these actors are wearing signs around the neck that read WPA. So again, WPA, not to be confused with PWA. This was focused on teacher salaries, but also helping more of what we would call the liberal arts. All right, number 4, all workers, including the unemployed. How did what problems did they face? Unemployment. If you haven't figured it out yet, this is a reoccurring theme. The unemployment, poverty, hopelessness, loss of dignity. All workers. Hey, lack of spending money. And there it is, and watch it bounce away or fade away. The WPA, again from question number 3, Works Progress Administration from the Second New Deal. The NYA, also helping the unemployed and all workers. The National Youth Administration. And the National Labor Relations Act, also known as the Wagner Act. Now this was created for 2 reasons. It helps workers, it protects workers from their employers, and allows workers to strike if they feel like they should strike, and really employers have no recourse. They can't fire the worker for striking. The second part of the Wagner Act protected workers from the unions that they would join. If the workers felt that the union was not representing them fairly, then they could abandon their membership in the union, basically fire their union, and form a union all of their own, or form a new union, or bring in a new union, anything that was going to represent them, or what they felt would represent them better. Now, the Wagner Act created what's called the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, and this is a group, a board of men and women, whoever, that investigates violations of the Wagner Act. If there's a word, or if there's information that says an employer was violating the Wagner Act, the NLRB would go in and investigate. Or maybe a union is violating its contractual obligations with its members, then the NLRB would go in and investigate that as well. But officially, the formal language of the Wagner Act states that the NLRB would investigate and ensure fair labor practices. And another Second New Deal program to help the unemployed and workers was the Fair Labor Standards Act. And a final act of the Second New Deal, which we will talk about in number 5, is the Social Security Act. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it right here, but we'll get into that in number 5. Here's a scene, a photo of some striking workers. You can see the the policemen have fired tear gas into the crowd to try to calm the crowd just a little bit. Again, the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, would investigate any unfair practices and step in and basically prevent this from happening. Social Security Act, you can see Norman T. Mingo was assigned the number 0000000. I don't know if that's an accurate card. It looks kind of fake on the side, but you know, who knows? It may be real. You can see the date of issue is 1939, but that'd be pretty wild if that was your Social Security number. Easy to remember. Number 5 addresses a group that is often forgotten about. Throughout the Great Depression, we talk about how people are looking for jobs and how people want jobs so they can have money and spending money, take care of their family. Well, number 5 talks about retired workers. That's a group that you don't really think of. The Great Depression hit. It hurt those people and put some people out of work. Well, what about those people who have reached the age of not being able to work anymore? They're retired people. What are they going to do? They have nothing to help them in retirement. So we see that these people faced a sense of hopelessness, a loss of dignity. How are you going to live out the rest of your life? Well, the Social Security Act was designed to help these people specifically, and this is where I really want to get into this. Social Security was designed to help the unemployed, but also to help those people in retirement. And the way Social Security works today is a portion of your paycheck is taken out, set aside, put into this Social Security account. And when you retire, that money comes back to you on a monthly basis. Retired workers had to come out of retirement and look for jobs. In this case, these guys are waiting in a soup line or a bread line. But like all the other workers and all the other young men, they found that there was no work available. And so the Second New Deal, the Social Security Act, really helped them out. Now, the Social Security Act was challenged in the Supreme Court, and it was found to be constitutional. And there's going to be a thing that we do in class, a little activity we do in class that talks about this. We haven't talked about the Agricultural Adjustment Act yet a lot, especially on this video, but in the Supreme Court, the AAA was declared unconstitutional, like several New Deal programs. And with some changing opinions and changing attitudes on the courts, the Social Security Act was allowed. And again, we'll get into that in class. But again, the SSA, the Social Security Act, was designed to help those people who were retired in their retirement. Number 6, the disabled, the needy, the elderly, and dependent mothers of children. The problems they faced, I will give you one guess. Hey, hopelessness, a loss of dignity, and again, Social Security Act helped these people. Now let's take a look at this little cartoon, or not a cartoon, it's just a photo. On the surface, let's look at it that way. Across the top we see the world's highest standard of living, just a billboard advertising what life was like in the 1920s. You know, you got your car, maybe it's a Studebaker, you got mom and dad, brother, sister in the back, and you got a dog. You know, the typical American family. There's no way like the American way. On the surface, you know, that's fantastic. Now let's get into a little bit of the deeper analysis of it. These people are probably standing in a bread line, maybe a soup line. Maybe a clothing bank is on the other side of this wall somewhere. Who knows? It's very ironic that the slogan, "There's no way like the American way," fits a family, and I'm not trying to be racist here, but it is kind of funny, fits a family of white people. Even the dog is white, and here we have a bunch of African American people standing in front. There's no way like the American way. Like what? We're just going to run over everybody because we're white, because we're superior? Again, not trying to get into the racist. I don't want to get into that. That's not what I'm trying to say. That's not what I mean. And that's not why this sign was posted here. But it just goes to show you the impact of what the 20s were like, and then jump into the 30s and Great Depression, and the contrast of how badly things had become. Again, Social Security, old age retirement, taking care of grandpa in his old age. Social Security Act amended other greater old age insurance protection to people now now nearing retirement age, and that's from the Social Security Board. All right, that ends 15.2. The Second New Deal takes hold. That's the end of the notes. If I went too fast, or if you want a little bit more in detail, I have posted online in my live binder the copy of some textbook pages of 15.2 that will allow you to read a little bit more in depth. But nice job. Again, go back if you need to. Watch this as many times as you need to, and make sure you get those notes done and bring them to class tomorrow.